For almost 20 years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban seemed like the perfect couple. She was a famous movie actress who won big awards, and he was a country music star. Everyone thought their love story was amazing. But things weren't as perfect as they looked. Now we know Nicole asked for a divorce after 19 years together. People say she tried really hard to save their marriage. When Keith performed on stage for the first time after the split, he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. He didn't sing any love songs about Nicole, and he even changed some words in his songs that made people think he was upset. The perfect couple image is broken now, and we're finally hearing Nicole's side of the story. Let's look at what made everyone love them so much, and what made their famous love story come to an end. Nicole Mary Kidman was born in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1967. Her parents were from Australia but were living there for a little while. Her dad, Anthony Kidman, was a doctor who studied the mind and science stuff. Her mom, Janelle, was a nurse and teacher. When Nicole was still little, her family moved back to Sydney, Australia. She grew up in a home where her parents wanted her to work hard and do well. Young Nicole wasn't like the confident woman she became later. She was actually really shy. When teachers asked her to talk in class, her face would turn bright red. Her teachers worried she didn't believe in herself. But even though she was shy, she had a big imagination. She found a safe place in performing. First, she tried ballet dancing, then acting classes, and finally theater groups for kids. There, she could show feelings that were hard for her to show in regular life. By the time she was a teenager, everyone could see she had real talent. Australia was making more movies back then, and she grabbed her chance. She got parts in TV movies, and then got cast in a 1983 movie called BMX Bandits that became really popular. She had pale skin and was tall, which made her stand out. But it was how well she could show emotions that made directors think she would become really famous. By the late 1980s, Hollywood wanted her. It was during this time that Nicole met Tom Cruise, her first big love and her first big heartbreak. They got married in 1990 and became one of the most photographed couples in Hollywood. For Nicole, being married to Tom brought fame but also pain. Tom followed a religion called Scientology, and it caused problems in their marriage. Nicole doesn't talk much about those years, but everyone knows that when the marriage ended in 2001, she lost more than just a husband. She also lost the main care of their two adopted children, Isabella and Connor. This hurt Nicole so deeply. Friends said later that Nicole felt like she lost being a mom, pushed to the side of her children's lives. For a woman who really wanted a family, this was one of the worst things that ever happened to her. It makes sense that when she later met Keith Urban, she was really determined to rebuild that dream of having a home and family that she had lost. Keith Lionel Urban was born in New Zealand the same year as Nicole. His family moved to Queensland, Australia when he was young. That's where his personality started to show. He was restless and a bit rebellious, always looking for a way out. His dad, Bob, ran a small store but also really loved country music. This kind of music wasn't very popular in Australia. He told young Keith to learn guitar, and by age 6, Keith was already performing. Country music, with its sad stories about broken hearts and second chances, gave Keith both an identity and a way to deal with his feelings. But while his music talent was amazing, his home life wasn't easy. People say his family had fights and money problems, which might be why he spent his whole life looking for something stable. When he was a teenager, he performed at talent shows and small bars. He was building not just his sound but also his image as the cool country outsider who looked like a rock star. He dropped out of school to do music full-time. For Keith, there was no backup plan. Music was his only way out. But along with his talent came problems. By his 20s, he was already drinking too much and using harmful substances. When fame came, it didn't make things better. It made everything more crazy. He moved to Nashville in the early 1990s because he wanted to be recognized. After years of working really hard, he finally got his big break in 1999 with his first American album. Suddenly, Keith was country music's new hot guy. People loved his guitar playing, messy hair, and voice that sounded full of feelings. But behind the scenes, success came with self-destruction. By the time he met Nicole in 2005, he had already been to rehab more than once. He lived with the constant fear that his addictions might cost him everything he worked so hard to build. Nicole and Keith seemed like they came from totally different worlds. She was Hollywood fancy, he was Nashville rough. What really connected them was the baggage they both carried. Nicole had scars from losing her family, and a marriage that made her afraid of being controlled and betrayed. Keith carried the instability of a man who had known both being unknown and being famous, but never really beat the urge to mess things up for himself. When they finally met, both were at important points in their lives. Nicole had come back stronger than ever after her divorce. She won an Academy Award for a movie called The Hours, and proved she was one of the best actresses ever. But she was still emotionally hurt and wanted stability after 10 years of chaos. Keith was becoming a star, making his place in the tough world of American country music. But the pressures of fame, endless touring, temptation, and an industry that cares as much about image as sound were pushing him to the edge. He needed someone who could keep him grounded, who could help him believe in something beyond the stage lights. Looking back, you can see the warning signs. Her need for control and stability was always going to crash with Keith's restless, addictive personality. Their relationship had the promise of healing. Maybe she could rebuild the family she lost, and he could find redemption in her steadiness. But it also had the seeds of future problems. For Nicole, being with another celebrity was risky. Her marriage to Tom Cruise taught her how cruel the public attention could be. But with Keith, she saw vulnerability, even fragility, and it called to her protective instincts. For him, she was both inspiration and a mirror, someone whose discipline and success showed his own instability, but whose love gave him the chance to become the man he always wanted to be. Their early lives had shaped them into complicated, wounded people. When they finally came together in 2005, it felt like fate, but really it was more like explosive chemistry. When Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban finally met in 2005, the media told it like a Hollywood fantasy. Two Australians, both world-famous stars, both born the same year, both toughened by past struggles, meeting at the exact moment their lives seemed ready for a fresh start. The red carpets and shiny magazines said their meeting was meant to be. But beneath the surface, the relationship was less about destiny, and more about two hurt people, holding on to hope for rescue. The first spark happened at a fancy event called Good Day USA in Los Angeles in January 2005. It was a celebration of Australians working in Hollywood. Nicole was past the storm of her divorce with Tom Cruise, but by then she had rebuilt her career and stood tall as an Oscar-winning actress. Keith was the rising Nashville star whose records were starting to become mainstream pop hits. When they were introduced, she admitted later she didn't think he was interested. He was polite but quiet, and even though they exchanged phone numbers, he didn't call her for months. She said years later that his lack of calling almost ruined the love story before it began. But when he finally reached out, something clicked. Their romance moved fast once it started. By May, they were photographed together, and by the end of the year, she was talking about him in interviews as the man who swept her off her feet. For her, who had lived through the suffocating attention of her marriage to Tom, he represented freedom. He was passionate, raw, and unpolished in every way that Tom Cruise wasn't. For Keith, she represented respect, elegance, and the kind of stabilizing force he had never known. By November, he was walking red carpets with Nicole, not just as her date, but as her partner. Their chemistry was obvious, and the press fell hard for the pair. Australia's golden children had found each other in America. In June 2006, just over a year after they started dating, they got married in a big, beautiful ceremony at a chapel in Sydney near the beach. She wore a fancy wedding dress with a long veil, while he, with his trademark long hair, looked like a romantic musician. The guest list sparkled with Hollywood stars and country music celebrities, but the real story was how personal and intimate the event was. Nicole reportedly walked into the church by candlelight, trying not to cry, while he sang to her during the party after. For fans, it was the perfect ending to both of their troubled pasts. Nicole, the woman who had lived under the controlling grip of her previous love, had found a man who seemed to love her completely. Keith had found redemption in the arms of one of the world's most respected actresses. Unfortunately, unlike fairy tales, reality was less perfect. Just 4 months after the wedding, Keith checked himself into rehab for drinking problems. It was a terrible blow to their newlywed happiness. Nicole had barely finished writing thank you cards when she was thrown into a crisis. The tabloids jumped on it, suggesting she had married a time bomb. For him, going back to his old habits was embarrassing. He had promised that her love would be enough to keep him steady. But his old problems came back quickly. Nicole, who always protected her private life, chose loyalty over embarrassment. She stood by him, visiting him in rehab and refusing to let the press see her upset. In later interviews, he said she saved his life during that time. But people close to them saw something more complicated. She had been denied the chance to save her marriage with Tom, so now she was throwing herself into the role of healer and protector with Keith. She believed in second chances, and in him. That loyalty would shape much of their marriage, for better and for worse. Despite the rough start, the couple spent the next years creating their image as one of Hollywood's rare, lasting romances. She continued to take on big movie roles, balancing blockbusters like Australia with movies that got great reviews like Rabbit Hole. Meanwhile, he became one of country music's biggest stars, touring constantly and winning awards, including multiple Grammy Awards. Publicly, they were loving. She once said he was the person who brought her back to life. Keith often thanked her at award shows, sometimes with tears in his eyes. Behind the carefully created image, there was tension. His career meant long stretches on the road, while she often filmed movies in other countries. They tried to make it work, even making rules like never spending more than a few weeks apart. But people close to them said their schedules often clashed. Nicole, deeply hurt by her separation from Isabella and Connor Cruz, held tight to the idea of family. When she and Keith had their first daughter, Sunday Rose, in 2008, followed by Faith Margaret in 2010, she poured herself into being a mom. He loved his children, but struggled with balancing being a dad and the restless life of a touring musician. Over time, they successfully sold themselves as proof that Hollywood cynicism was wrong. Interviewers praised them as proof that real love could survive fame. Photos of the family at the airport with her holding the girls while he carried luggage behind made everyone think they were a close family. Yet beneath the surface, their bond had gotten weaker. His ongoing fight with staying sober was a constant problem. Her need for stability sometimes turned into control, and friends hinted that the couple's differences went deeper than either admitted. Still, they pushed forward, determined to keep the fairy tale alive. Their early years together had been marked by falling in love quickly and getting married in a short time, then dealing with crisis almost immediately. That intensity meant they never really slowed down to face the cracks forming in their foundation. For nearly 2 decades, they kept up the act. A reformed bad boy and his patient savior. What no one knew then was that the same whirlwind energy that carried them into love would eventually push them into heartbreak. The fairy tale was always fragile and built on hope and performance as much as on reality. But the pressure was building. By the time Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban reached their first 10 years of marriage, they had already survived more ups and downs than most couples could handle in a lifetime. Rehab only months after the wedding, long separations because of work, and the balancing act of raising 2 daughters in the public eye. All of it created a constant feeling of pressure underneath. And yet for years they remained a symbol of strength. By the mid-2010s, rumors of fighting started appearing more often. There were whispers of arguments over schedules, over Keith's nightlife, and even over Nicole's intensity. The couple always denied the rumors, often showing united fronts in interviews. Nicole would often say they've never been stronger, while Keith would say the same thing, calling Nicole his rock. Yet cracks have a way of showing no matter how carefully you hide them. Friends close to the couple said she was someone who had grown more and more tired of carrying the emotional weight of his struggles. While she admired his music, she worried about his mental balance. Keith sometimes pushed back when he was treated like the one needing rescue. He reportedly wanted to be her equal, not her project. What kept them together for so long was the same thing that pulled them apart, and that was their opposite needs. Nicole loved his vulnerability but feared it. He loved her strength but felt overshadowed by it. Their marriage was a constant negotiation between saving and resisting, between passion and exhaustion. All the while, the public story stayed stubbornly the same. They were the love story that had beaten the odds. Few knew how much effort it took to keep up that illusion, how much of their private energy was spent holding up the act. The pressure to live up to their image was huge. They weren't just husband and wife. They were proof of hope for fans who wanted to believe that love could survive addiction, distance, and fame. Every photo, every public gesture became part of the story. But big stories, as history often shows, can be both inspiring and crushing. Nicole and Keith had become prisoners of their own fairy tale. Raising their daughters also showed their differences. Nicole, remembering lessons from her own broken family experience, focused on routine, structure, and protecting her children from the chaos of fame. Keith leaned toward being lenient, playing the role of the fun parent. While their daughters loved both parents, people close to them whispered that Nicole reportedly felt undermined sometimes, while he sometimes felt criticized for not being serious enough. These weren't big explosive fights that tabloids dream of. They were quieter divisions, the kind that wear down trust and closeness over time. As the 2020s began, tabloids started guessing about cracks in the marriage. Stories came out about arguments, about time spent apart, about whispers of Keith's old demons. Both Nicole and Keith dismissed the rumors, often appearing hand in hand soon after a story came out. Nicole would say in interviews, "We've never been stronger," her calm tone making doubters believe her. But behind those denials there was truth to the rumors. Keith continued to battle staying sober. While there's no proof that he spiraled as badly as in the past, people close to them suggested that her fear of him going back to old habits never fully left her. She stayed watchful, sometimes to the point of creating tension. To Keith, it could feel suffocating to be watched and doubted, even when he was doing everything right. Nicole, for her part, grew tired of always being the anchor. She loved him, but she wanted balance, a marriage where she wasn't constantly getting ready for the next storm. Perhaps the most telling sign of their falling apart was the difference between their private and public selves. Privately, they were drifting, fighting, circling around problems they never solved. Publicly, they doubled down on the fairy tale. Their red carpet appearances became more and more important, as though they were putting on shows not for the cameras but for themselves, reminding each other and the world of the love story they had once believed in. At events, Keith would grip Nicole's hand tightly, often kissing her shoulder, whispering in her ear. She would smile, composed, but people watching noticed that her smiles seemed more rehearsed than natural. The affection looked real but strained, like actors saying lines they had memorized long ago. Every marriage carries unspoken resentments, but in their case, those resentments grew louder with each passing year. Nicole reportedly resented his dependence on her strength, his need for her to be both wife and savior. He resented her control, her ability to manage not just herself but him, their children, and their image with military precision. Friends close to the couple described their relationship as one of constant negotiation. He wanted freedom while she wanted security. He wanted passion while she wanted peace. Neither was wrong, but their needs were rarely in sync. By 2023 and 2024, the whispers became louder. Anonymous sources in entertainment magazines hinted that they were living separate lives, that they were together but apart. Paparazzi photos started to support the theory as she began attending events alone. Meanwhile, he was spotted on tour without his wedding ring, as both of them avoided questions about each other in interviews. Still, the couple resisted the story of collapse. Nicole often spoke about how marriage required a lot of work, an admission that seemed modest but also revealing. He would insist that she was his everything, even as his words began to sound like rehearsals of an old script, rather than natural declarations. Still, ultimately, every falling apart has a tipping point, and theirs came in the summer of 2025. By then, the cracks had widened into big breaks. She was spending more and more time with her daughters, pulling back into family and away from the circus of rumors. Meanwhile, he threw himself into music, touring harder, pouring his emotions into performances that sometimes seemed like confessions. Those closest to them say the decision to separate wasn't explosive. There was no single scandal, no final argument. Instead, it was the slow realization that they were no longer helping each other. Nicole, heartbroken but firm, realized she could no longer be both partner and caretaker. Keith, tired of the weight of Nicole's expectations, chose to step away. When she finally filed for divorce in late September 2025, saying they had irreconcilable differences, the world gasped. But for those who had been watching closely, the end felt like it was going to happen. For nearly 20 years, these two had built one of Hollywood's most admired stories, a tale of redemption, strength, and lasting love. The words on the legal papers were brief, just irreconcilable differences, yet they carried the weight of a story far more complicated. What followed was not just a legal separation, but a very public unmasking, with each move showing the raw truth of a marriage that had long been struggling to survive. Nicole filed in Davidson County, Tennessee, where the couple had kept a family home. The paperwork was straightforward, even restrained, but what it meant was enormous. After 19 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless declarations of forever love, she was walking away. People close to her suggested she had struggled with the decision for months. She had been deeply committed to keeping the family together, especially for their daughters, Sunday and Faith. But as one friend put it, she realized she couldn't save both the marriage and herself. For years, she had carried the role of stabilizer, his anchor against addiction, the planner in a relationship often defined by chaos. Finally, she chose self-preservation. The documents made clear that she was asking for primary residential custody of the girls, with him sharing joint decision-making authority. Notably, both of them waived spousal support and child support, a sign that their money had long been kept separate. If her filing was the quiet announcement of the end, Keith's response was louder, rawer, and far more obvious. Just days after the divorce news broke, he was seen, and most importantly, his wedding ring was missing. If that wasn't clear enough, during his first performance since the divorce, he changed lyrics in 2 of his signature songs. At his Pennsylvania concert, he transformed what might have been just another stop on his High and Alive world tour into a buzzed public reckoning with his personal life, laying bare a storm of emotions in front of thousands of fans. Performing for the first time since the announcement of his split from Nicole Kidman after nearly 2 decades of marriage, he wasted no time showing that this was going to be more than a standard country set. He walked onto the stage without his wedding band, a symbolic gesture that did not go unnoticed by the audience. And throughout the night his actions swung between fury, heartache, and a strangely tender sense of nostalgia. The moment that drew the most gasps came during his 2004 breakup song, "You'll Think of Me," when he changed the line, "Take your space and take your reasons," into a harsh, "Take your unreasonable reasons," a lyric twist that many saw as a thinly veiled shot at Nicole and the breakdown of their marriage. This raw outburst, spit out with clear frustration, stood in direct contrast to the image he allowed to play during Heart Like a Hometown, where images of him and their 2 teenage daughters appeared in a slideshow, a decision that seemed like a reluctant nod to his family, even in the middle of falling apart ties. Fans also noticed that he completely dropped The Fighter from his set list, a 2016 hit believed to have been inspired directly by his relationship with Nicole and often performed with her in mind, signaling a deliberate erasure of their shared history from his stage acts. Between songs, he opened up honestly about his childhood, remembering how his parents encouraged him to leave school to pursue music, as though to remind himself and the audience of the passion that had carried him long before fame. Marriage and scandal. The emotional roller coaster did not end there. While rumors swirled around his reported closeness with younger guitarist Maggie Baugh, who was notably absent that night, her shadow still hung over the performance, thanks to viral clips resurfacing online of him singing to her with changed lyrics at earlier shows. This absence, paired with his pointed set-list changes, only made the mystery and drama surrounding his private life bigger. By the end of the night, it was clear his performance had become something bigger than a concert. The divorce filings and Keith's dramatic concert instantly flipped the media scene. Tabloids feasted on the drama, framing Nicole as the wronged woman who had finally had enough. Keith was cast as the tragic case, a man undone by his demons and his inability to meet her needs. Fans took sides, picking apart every lyric he sang, every look she gave during public appearances. For Nicole, the renewed glare of the spotlight was suffocating. She had filed quietly, hoping to keep the drama small, but his stage gestures made privacy impossible. Suddenly she was forced to respond not with words, but with the careful planning of her public appearances. At a film festival weeks later, she appeared without her wedding ring, her poise unshaken, but her eyes showing deep sadness. At the heart of the divorce was the question of family. For Nicole, the loss of Isabella and Connor during her marriage to Tom Cruise remained an open wound. She was determined not to repeat history with Sunday and Faith. The divorce documents made clear her intent. The girls would mainly live with her, ensuring stability in the face of upheaval. Keith has also reportedly agreed without much resistance. His touring schedule and unpredictable lifestyle make him less suited for day-to-day parenting. But people close to them noted his heartbreak at the arrangement. A source has reportedly said, "Keith adores those girls, and handing over primary custody wasn't about lack of love. It was about reality." In the weeks following the filing, Nicole has pulled back into the safety of her daughters and her work. She was photographed in Nashville, walking hand in hand with Sunday and Faith, her face composed but her body language protective. For her, survival means focusing on what she can control, which is basically her children, her career, and her own well-being. Meanwhile, Keith has poured himself into music. His shows are electric spectacles, each performance doubling as a therapy session. Fans described his concerts as heartbreak on display, with him openly crying during certain songs. His vulnerability made audiences love him more, but also showed perhaps the reality that Nicole has decided to walk away from. What do you think of their divorce? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. To enjoy more exciting videos, click play on the video on your screen. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified when a new video is released.